Well, hello, everybody. I'm Peter Larson with the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine, and I'm very happy to be talking this afternoon with Dania Majid, who is the chair of the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association. Dania, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Your organization just came out with, or now about 2 months ago, came out with a very interesting report on anti-Palestinian racism. And I'd like to talk to you a bit about that notion and about the report and so on. But I've got to start off with a little bit of a challenge to you, because when I first heard the term anti-Palestinian racism, I thought that maybe you were, I don't know, exaggerating a little bit. I of course, am very, very much aware of Islamophobia and aware of anti-Arab feeling, but I didn't think or suspect or believe that there was anything specific to Palestinians that could be called anti-Palestinian racism. So maybe you can explain a little bit your notion and the behind the report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this report really started off as a challenge to ourselves. And a lot of the work came out of what happened out of U of T Faculty of Law and the scandal there around the hiring of Dr. Azerova, which the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association was very much involved in at the beginning. So in doing that work, we wanted to ensure that Palestinians weren't erased from, from the scandal as being, really the foundation of that scandal. And in, doing the media work and writing to the Canadian Judicial Council and the Cromwell Review, we casted this as anti-Palestinian racism to ensure that, this wasn't just an issue about academic freedom and donor interference, that there was, at the root of it was, something nefarious towards Palestinians. And then when we were working on these submissions, we started doing the research into anti-Palestinian racism. We have, myself and my colleagues at the Arab Lawyers Association have ourselves personally and heard many stories of Palestinians who've talked about these feelings of being targeted, smeared, silenced by virtue of being openly supporters of Palestinians. And this is really that challenge of this notion is what launched us into this work and got us, looking into this issue. And through that work and through our research and through our consultations, we are confident to say that anti-Palestinian racism does exist. It is a unique form of racism that is experienced by Palestinians and those who openly advocate for Palestinians. It does have real harmful effects towards us. And, in our consultations, those in Canada and US and Europe and Palestine have also, described very universal and similar experiences when they do that advocacy work as Palestinians. So, and the other thing that came out of it that, in our talks and our consultations with community is that this is a very different form of racism than Islamophobia. So Islamophobia does not capture what is happening to us as Palestinian advocates. It is, related to anti-Arab racism, but again, there was something very specific about the experiences of those who work on Palestinian or who are Palestinian that, made us confident to conclude that anti-Palestinian racism is a defined term. It's a term that describes our experiences.
So we're not talking about you're walking down the street and someone pointing a finger at you and say, there goes a Palestinian. We're talking about Palestinians, who, if I understand correctly from the report, who are trying to raise their voice, have their voice heard, and there is an aversion to hearing that voice or a way to suppress that voice. And that's one of the key themes, if I got it right, of anti-Palestinian racism.
I mean, that was the, that type of systemic issue, institutional issues, what we definitely focused on because we see it's so pervasive amongst institutions, but not discussed. However, we do hear the stories of Palestinians who might be wearing a t-shirt, a keffiyeh, anything identifying them as a pro-Palestinian, also being attacked in the streets. And myself, I have been attacked on the streets for having a pro-Palestine sticker on my bag. And I was attacked myself. And, we saw last year in the May 2021 protests that happened, there were a group of Palestinians who attended that protest and were violently attacked with knives and bats because they were walking down the street with their flags and with their keffiyehs.
There was an incident here in Ottawa, and I don't know whether you would say we're talking about the same thing. A number of students protested here in Ottawa in May, I guess, was of this year, and their claim was that in their school there were flags of every other country in the world, but that refusal to put up a Palestinian flag. And even when it was brought to the attention of the school principal, the argument was, well, that would be political, and therefore we can't do it. So they were. I think as I understand it, the school board actually reversed policy on that, but that was as a result of some pressure by students.
Yes, and that's one of the elements of anti-Palestinian racism is the silencing and erasure of us as an identity, as a people, as our our history, our narrative, and so that is what I would define as an example of anti-Palestinian racism.
Okay. Now, where does this come from? Is this the guiding hand of the Zionist lobby doing this? Is it does it come from one or two organizations, or is it broader? Is it organic in Canadian society? How do you explain it?
I mean, I definitely would describe it as pervasive. We find it in all elements of Canadian society, all institutions. It definitely comes from a place that, where anti-Palestinian racism is used to uphold Israel's practices towards the Palestinians, to uphold settler colonialism on our land, apartheid, the illegal occupation. So, these types of tactics that are used are really used to uphold, those practices. And then we see it manifest itself, here in Canada and other countries as well, where we see the media, not speaking to Palestinians or, looking to us to provide our point of view, or erasing, the Palestinian narrative. And we have examples of that, citing the CBC in that regard. Then we have examples in our school boards and our campuses, many examples where students, wanting to present on Palestine or organize on Palestine, and, those institutions silencing them or punishing them for that organizing work, and so on. So, and then again, of course, the Canadian government, time and time again, we see their policies really based on very negative, stereotypical, discriminatory, and I would say hostile views of Palestinians in our perspective. And that, becomes entrenched in official government policy.
Would you say the condemnation by the Canadian Parliament of BDS as being inherently anti-Semitic, is that sort of part of the same phenomenon you're referring to? Absolutely,
yes. Again, because it's they are not coming at this trying to understand the Palestinian perspective on BDS, on the movement, the Palestinian movement as a fundamentally anti-racist movement, and instead they have adopted the tropes that are made against Palestinians as us being violent, inherently anti-Semitic, and so on, and adopting that messaging, that narrative, and creating policy or statements based on those, very false and discriminatory descriptors.
When you picked up this information from anecdotal experience, but you also did a survey. Tell me a bit about the survey you did.
Right. So what happened, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the formal work on anti-Palestinian racism really came out of the Dr. Azerova scandal. And
just this is for people who might not be familiar with this. Can you just give us 30 seconds on that, please?
Absolutely. So Dr. Azerova applied for a job at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. And in her work, she has critiqued or commented on the Israel-Palestine situation, criticizing Israel's practices against the Palestinians. So she had applied for the job. She was the top candidate. An offer was made. They were in the process of hiring her when a judge from the tax court, who is also a donor to the University of Toronto and the Faculty of Law, picked up the phone and warned the university against hiring her because of her writings, and thought that it would present, she was a controversial figure, essentially. And as a result of that, the university rescinded the job offer, and it resulted in a very large movement. So the university was under censure. There was a big movement to pressure the university to rehire her. And in that process, there was also an investigation at the Faculty of Law, which we participated in. And in doing that work, because we knew we were talking to a former justice, former judge of the Supreme Court who was conducting the investigation, our approach was very much a legal one. And we wanted to present anti-Palestinian racism, or to highlight how it manifests within the institution and within campuses. And so we came up with a very quick description of what anti-Palestinian racism was after we couldn't find analysis in other literature. And we presented our analysis based on that descriptor. Afterwards, we were hesitant about publicizing this report without doing some community consultation on anti-Palestinian racism on the descriptor that we had come up with. So what we did was we came up with a survey that presented the description that we had come up with, and we circulated it to academics, Palestinian solidarity organizations, legal experts, those who are sort of doing the work on the front lines, even parent groups, activist groups, and so on. And those that were situated in Canada, the US, Europe, and Palestine. And we circulated this with a set of survey questions to get their feedback on, do you think this is helpful? Having a term for anti-Palestinian racism, is that helpful? Do you like what we've come up with? What are your thoughts, suggestions on what we've come up with? What's missing? What should be added? And we got a ton of feedback. And as a result, what was started off as what we thought was going to be a very simple exercise, we learned from the exercise that there was a lot more work that needed to be done. And we incorporated all that feedback into what then became this report, to sort of highlight the nuances and the different opinions that we collected through this consultation.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a ton of work. Dania, out of it all, what do you think needs to be done? What do Palestinian Canadians need to do? What do solidarity groups need to do? And what do you think governments or institute or universities should do?
Right. So this report was created with the intention that this was going to be a resource for anyone doing work on Palestine or dealing with issues that arise on Palestine. So, for the Palestinian groups, we're not here to dictate their work, but we are presenting them with the resource that they can use in doing their work. So we have seen, for example, those dealing with school boards, they have actually been, using our report to push on issues, to describe conflicts that are arising and starting the conversation with their school boards. We've seen that on academic institutions. We've been seeing this, and I've been approached by groups across Europe who are also dealing with issues around censorship on Palestine, who are using that report. So it is a tool for community to use any way they see fit in their own context, and to adapt the information that we have in this report to their own context. In terms of institutions, including government and campuses, this report is an educational tool for them to understand what Palestinians experience on campus or, within their institution, how their behavior is harming us, the racial trauma that results, the silencing that persists. And it's a tool it's an educational tool that we hope that they will take on, that they will study carefully. We are here to provide, guidance, support, and have those conversations. But we really want to see them, understand what is written in the report, and to end the silencing of, Palestinians and Palestinian advocates, whether it be on campus or through government policies that are directed towards us.
Well, Dania, I will include a link to this report. I'll try to make a few summary notes in presenting it. I think it's an interesting document, a novel framing of the issue, and I think you brought some light on a frustration that many Palestinian Canadians and many human rights groups face in trying to bring the Palestinian narrative into the Canadian mainstream. So thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.